Z. Marcas. I never saw anybody, not even among the most remarkable men of the day, whose appearance was so striking, as this man's. The study of his countenance at first gave me a feeling of great melancholy, and at last produced an almost painful impression. There was a certain harmony between the man and his name, the Z preceding Marcas, which was seen on the addresses of his letters, and which he never omitted from his signature as the last letter of the alphabet, suggested some mysterious fatality. Marcas say this two-syllabled name again and again. Do you not feel as if it had some sinister meaning? Does it not seem to you that its owner must be doomed to martyrdom, though foreign savage? The name has a right to be handed down to posterity. It is well constructed, easily pronounced, and has the brevity that beseems a famous name. Is it not pleasant as well as odd? But does it not sound unfinished? I will not take it upon myself to assert that names have no influence on the destiny of men. There is a certain secret and inexplicable concord, or a visible discord between the events of a man's life and his name, which is truly surprising, often some remote, but very real correlation is revealed. Our globe is round, everything is linked to everything else. Some day, perhaps we shall revert to the occult sciences. Do you not discern in that letter Z an adverse influence? Does it not prefigure the wayward and fantastic progress of a storm-tossed life? What wind blew on that letter, which, whatever language we find it in, begins scarcely 50 words? Marca's name was Zéphirin. Saint Zéphirin is highly venerated in Brittany, and Marcas was a Breton. Study the name once more. Z. Marcas. The man's whole life lies in this fantastic juxtaposition of 7 letters, 7, the most significant of all the Kabbalistic numbers, and he died at 35, so his life extended over 7 lustres. Marcas, does it not hint of some precious object that is broken with a fall, with or without a crash? I had finished studying the law in Paris in 1836. I lived at that time in the Rue Corneille, in a house where none but students came to lodge, one of those large houses where there is a winding staircase quite at the back, lighted below from the street, higher up by borrowed lights, and at the top by a skylight. There were 40 furnished rooms, furnished as students' rooms are. What does youth demand more than was here? Supplied a bed, a few chairs, a chest of drawers, a looking-glass, and a table. As soon as the sky is blue, the student opens his window. But in this street there are no fair neighbors to flirt with. In front is the Odeon, long since closed, presenting a wall that is beginning to go black, its tiny gallery windows, and its vast expanse of slate roof. I was not rich enough to have a good room. I was not even rich enough to have a room to myself, just, and I shared a double-bedded room on the 5th floor. On our side of the landing, there were but 2 roomsers, and a smaller one occupied by Z. Marcas, our neighbor, for 6 months just, and I remained in perfect ignorance of the fact. The old woman who managed the house had indeed told us that the room was inhabited, but she had added that we should not be disturbed, that the occupant was exceedingly quiet. In fact, for those 6 months, we never met our fellow lodger, and we never heard a sound in his room, in spite of the thinness of the partition that divided Uzone of those walls of lath and plaster, which are common in Paris houses. Our room, a little over 7 feet high, was hung with a vile cheap paper, sprigged with blue. The floor was painted, and knew nothing of the polish given by the frotteur's brush by our beds. There was only a scrap of thin carpet. The chimney opened immediately to the roof, and smoked so abominably that we were obliged to provide a stove at our own expense. Our beds were mere painted wooden cribs, like those in schools. On the chimney shelf there were but 2 brass candlesticks, with or without tallow candles in them, and our 2 pipes with some tobacco in a pouch or strewn abroad, also the little piles of cigarettes left there by our visitors or ourselves. A pair of calico curtains hung from the brass window rods, and on each side of the window was a small bookcase in cherry wood, such as every one knows who has stared into the shop windows of the Quartier Latin, and in which we kept the few books necessary for our studies. The ink in the inkstand was always in the state of lava congealed in the crater of a volcano. May not any inkstand nowadays become a Vesuvius? The pens, all twisted, served to clean the stems of our pipes, and in opposition to all the laws of credit, paper was even scarcer than coin. How can young men be expected to stay at home in such furnished lodgings? The students studied in the cafes, the theater, the Luxembourg Gardens, in Grisette's rooms, even in the law school anywhere, rather than in their horrible room, curable for purposes of study, delightful as soon as they were used for gossiping and smoking. In put a cloth on the table, and the impromptu dinner sent in from the best eating house in the neighborhood. Places for 40 of them in petticoats show a lithograph of this interior to the veriest bigot. and she will be bound to smile. We thought only of amusing ourselves. The reason for our dissipation lay in the most serious facts of the politics of the time, just, and I could not see any room for us in the two professions. Our parents wished us to take up there, are 100 doctors, 100 lawyers. For one that is wanted, the crowd is choking these two paths, which are supposed to lead to fortune, but which are merely two arenas men kill each other. They're fighting not indeed with swords or firearms, but with intrigue and calumny, with tremendous toil campaigns in the sphere of the intellect, as murderous as those in Italy, were to the soldiers of the Republic in these days, when everything is an intellectual competition. A man must be able to sit 48 hours on end in his chair before a table, as a general could remain for 2 days on horseback, and in his saddle. The throng of aspirants has necessitated a division of the faculty of medicine into categories. There is the physician who writes, and the physician who practices, the political physician, and the physician militant for different ways of being a physician. 4 classes already filled up. As to the fifth class, that of physicians who sell remedies, there is such a competition that they fight each other with disgusting advertisements on the walls of Paris. In all the law courts, there are almost as many lawyers as there are cases. The pleader is thrown back on journalism, on politics, on literature. In fact, the state, besieged for the smallest appointments under the law, has ended by requiring that the applicants should have some little fortune. The pear-shaped head of the grocer's son is selected in preference to the square skull of a man of talent who has not a sou work as he will with all his energy. A young man starting from zero may, at the end of 10 years, find himself below the point he set out from. In these days, talent must have the good luck which secures success to the most incapable, nay more, if it scorns the base compromises which ensure advancement to crawling mediocrity, it will never get on. If we thoroughly knew our time, we also knew ourselves, and we preferred the indolence of dreamers to aimless easy-going pleasure, to the useless toil which would have exhausted our courage and worn out the edge of our intelligence. We had analyzed social life, while smoking, laughing, and loafing. But though elaborated by such means, as these our reflections were none the less judicious and profound. While we were fully conscious of the slavery to which youth is condemned, we were amazed at the brutal indifference of the authorities to everything connected with intellect, thought, and poetry. How often have Just and I exchanged glances when reading the papers, as we studied political events or the debates in the chamber and discussed the proceedings of a court whose willful ignorance could find no parallel. But in the platitude of the courtiers, the mediocrity of the men forming the hedge round the newly restored, thrown all alike devoid of talent or breadth of view, of distinction, or learning, of influence or dignity. Could there be a higher tribute to the court of Charles Roman X than the present court, if court it may be called? What a hatred of the country may be seen in the naturalization of vulgar foreigners devoid of talent, who are enthroned in the chamber of peers. What a perversion of justice, what an insult to the distinguished youth, the ambitions native to the soil of France. We looked upon these things as upon a spectacle and groaned over them, without taking upon ourselves to act. Just whom no one ever sought, and who never sought anyone, was at 25, a great politician, a man with a wonderful aptitude for apprehending the correlation between remote history and the facts of the present and of the future. In 1831, he told me exactly what would and did happen: murders, the conspiracies, the ascendancy of the Jews, the difficulty of doing anything in France, the scarcity of talent in the higher circles, and the abundance of intellect in the lowest ranks, where the finest courage is smothered under cigar ashes. What was to become of him? His parents wished him to be a doctor. But if he were a doctor, must he not wait 20 years for a practice? You know what he did know well: he is a doctor. But he left France. He is in Asia at this moment. He is perhaps sinking under fatigue in a desert, or dying of the lashes of a barbarous courtier. Perhaps he is some Indian prince's prime minister. Action is my vocation. Leaving a civil college at the age of 20, the only way for me to enter the army was by enlisting as a common soldier. So weary of the dismal outlook that lay before a lawyer, I acquired the knowledge needed for a sailor. I imitate Just and keep out of France, where men waste in the struggle to make way, the energy needed for the noblest works. Follow my example, friends. I am going where a man steers his destiny as he pleases. These great resolutions were formed in the little room in the lodging house in the Rue Corneille. In spite of our haunting the Bal Musard, flirting with girls of the town, and leading a careless and apparently reckless life, our plans and arguments long floated in the air. Marcas, our neighbor, was in some degree the guide who led us to the margin of the precipice, or the torrent who made us sound it, and showed us beforehand what our fate would be If we let ourselves fall into it, it was he who put us on our guard against the time bargains a man makes with poverty under the sanction of hope by accepting precarious situations. Once he fights the battle carried along by the devious tide of Paris, that great harlot, who takes you up or leaves you stranded, smiles, or turns her back on you with equal readiness, wears out the strongest will in vexatious waiting, and makes misfortune wait on chance. At our first meeting, Marcas, as it were, dazzled us on our return from the schools, a little before the dinner hour. We were accustomed to go up to our room and remain there, a while either waiting for the other to learn whether there were any change in our plans for the evening. One day at 4 o'clock, just met Marcas on the stairs, and I saw him in the street. It was in the month of November, and Marcas had no cloak. He wore shoes with heavy soles, corduroy trousers, and a blue double-breasted coat buttoned to the throat, which gave a military air to his broad chest, all the more so because he wore a black stock. The costume was not in itself extraordinary, but it agreed well with the man's mien and countenance. My first impression on seeing him was neither surprise nor distress, nor interest nor pity, but curiosity mingled with all these feelings. He walked slowly with a step that betrayed deep melancholy, his head forward with a stoop, but not bent like that of a conscientious-stricken man, that head large and powerful which might contain the treasures necessary for a man of the highest ambition, looked as if it were loaded with thought. It was weighted with grief of mind. But there was no touch of remorse in his expression. As to his face, it may be summed up in a word. A common superstition has it that every human countenance resembles some animal. The animal for Marcas was the lion. His hair was like a mane, his nose was short and flat, broad, and dented at the tip like a lion's. His brow, like a lion's, was strongly marked with a deep median furrow, dividing two powerful bosses. His high hairy cheekbones, all the more prominent because his cheeks were so thin, his enormous mouth and hollow jaws were accentuated by lines of tawny shadows. This almost terrible countenance seemed illuminated by two lamps to eyes, black indeed, but infinitely sweet, calm, and deep, full of thought, if I may say so. Those eyes had a humiliated expression. Marcas was afraid of looking directly at others, not for himself, but for those on whom his fascinating gaze might rest. He had a power, and he shunned using it. He would spare those he met, and he feared notice. This was not from modesty, but from resignation founded on reason, which had demonstrated the immediate inutility of his gifts, the impossibility of entering and living in the sphere for which he was fitted. Those eyes could at times flash lightnings from those lips. A voice of thunder must surely precede it. Was a mouth like Murray bows. I have seen such a grand fellow in the street, said I to Just on coming in. It must be our neighbor, replied Just, who described in fact the man I had just met. A man who lives like a woodlouse would be sure to look like that. He added, what dejection and what dignity! One is the consequence of the other. What ruined hopes, what schemes and failures! 7 leagues of ruins, obelisks, ballet stores, the ruins of Palmyra in the desert, said Just, laughing. So we called him the ruins of Palmyra. As we went out to dine at the wretched eating house in the Rue de la Harpe, to which we subscribed, we asked the name of number 37, and then heard the weird name Z Marcas. Like boys, as we were, we repeated it more than 100 times with all sorts of comments, absurd or melancholy, and the name lent itself to a jest. Just would fire off the Z like a rocket, rising ZZZZZ, and after pronouncing the first syllable of the name with great importance, depicted a fall by the dull brevity of the second. Now how and where does the man live? From this query to the innocent espionage of curiosity, there was no pause but that required for carrying out our plan. Instead of loitering about the streets, we both came in, each armed with a novel. We read with our ears open, and in the perfect silence of our attic rooms, we heard the even dull sound of a sleeping man breathing. He is asleep, said I to Just, noticing this fact. At 7 o'clock, replied the doctor. This was the name by which I called Just, and he called me the keeper of the seals. A man must be wretched, indeed, to sleep as much as our neighbor, cried I, jumping on to the chest of drawers, with a knife in my hand, to which a corkscrew was attached. I made a round hole at the top of the partition, about as big as a 5-sou piece. I had forgotten that there would be no light in the room, and on putting my eye to the hole I saw only darkness. At about 1 in the morning, when we had finished our books, and were about to undress, we heard a noise in our neighbor's room. He got up, struck a match, and lighted his dip. I got onto the drawers again, and I then saw Marcas seated at his table and copying law papers. His room was about half the size of ours. The bed stood in a recess by the door, for the passage ended there, and its breadth was added to his garret. But the ground on which the house was built was evidently irregular, for the party wall formed an obtuse angle, and the room was not square. There was no fireplace, only a small earthenware stove, white blotched with green, of which the pipe went up through the roof. The window in the skew side of the room had shabby red curtains. The furniture consisted of an armchair, a table, a chair, and a wretched beddable. A cupboard in the wall held his clothes. The wallpaper was horrible, evidently. Only a servant had ever been lodged there before Marcas. "What is to be seen?" asked the doctor as I got down. "Look for yourself," said Roman. 1 at 9 next morning. Marcas was in bed. He had breakfasted off a saveloy we saw on a plate with some crumbs of bread, the remains of that too familiar delicacy. He was asleep. He did not wake till 11. He then set to work again on the copy he had begun the night before, which was lying on the table. On going downstairs, we asked the price of that room, and were told 15 francs a month. In the course of a few days, we were fully informed as to the mode of life of Z. Marcas. He did copying at so much a sheet, no doubt, for a laureator who lived in the courtyard of the Sainte-Chapelle. He worked half the night. After sleeping from 6 till 10, he began again and wrote till 3. Then he went out to take the copy home before dinner, which he ate at Misery's in the Rue Michel Comte at a cost of 9 sous, and came into bed at 6 o'clock. It became known to us that Marcas did not utter 15 sentences in a month. He never talked to anybody, nor said a word to himself in his dreadful garret. "The ruins of Palmyra are terribly silent," said Just. This taciturnity in a man whose appearance was so imposing was strangely significant sometimes. When we met him, we exchanged glances full of meaning on both sides, but they never led to any advances insensibly. This man became the object of our secret admiration, though we knew no reason for it. It lie in his secretly simple habits, his monastic regularity, his hermit-like frugality, his idiotically mechanical labor, allowing his mind to remain neuter, or to work on his own lines, seeming to us to hint at an expectation of some stroke of good luck, or at some foregone conclusion as to his life. After wandering for a long time among the ruins of Palmyra, we forgot them. We were young. Then came the carnival, the Paris carnival, which henceforth will eclipse the old carnival of Venice, unless some ill-advised prefect of police is antagonistic. Gambling ought to be allowed during the carnival, but the stupid moralists who have had gambling suppressed are inert financiers, and this indispensable evil will be re-established among us when it is proved that France leaves millions at the German tables. This splendid carnival brought us to utter penury, as it does every student. We got rid of every object of luxury. We sold our second coats, our second boots, our second waistcoats, everything of which we had a duplicate. Except our friend, we ate bread and cold sausages. We looked where we walked. We had set to work in earnest. We owed 2 months' rent, and were sure of having a bill from the porter for 60 or 80 items each, and amounting to 40 or 50 francs. We made no noise, and did not laugh as we crossed the little hall at the bottom of the stairs. We commonly took it at a flying leap from the lowest step into the street. On the day when we first found ourselves bereft of tobacco for our pipes, it struck us that, for some days, we had been eating bread without any kind of butter. Great was our distress. "No tobacco," said the doctor. "No cloak," said the keeper of the seals. "Ah, you rascals, you would dress as the postilion de Longjumeau. You would appear as debardeurs, sup in the morning, and breakfast at night, at Vera sometimes, even at the Rocher de Cancel, dry bread for you, my boys. Why," said I in a big bass voice, "you deserve to sleep under the bed. You are not worthy to lie in it." "Yes, yes, but keeper of the seals, there is no more tobacco," said Just. "It is high time to write home to our aunts, our mothers, and our sisters, to tell them we have no underlinen left, that the wear and tear of Paris would ruin garments of wire. Then we will solve an elegant chemical problem by transmuting linen into silver. But we must live till we get the answer. Well, I will go and bring out a loan among such of our friends as may still have some capital to invest." "And how much will you find?" "Say 10 francs," replied I with pride. It was midnight. Marcas had heard everything. He knocked at our door. "Messieurs," said he, "here is some tobacco. You can repay me on the first opportunity." We were struck not by the offer which we accepted, but by the rich, deep, full voice in which it was made, a tone only comparable to the lowest string of Paganini's violin. Marcas vanished without waiting for our thanks. Just and I looked at each other without a word. To be rescued by a man evidently poorer than ourselves, just sat down to write to every member of his family. and I went off to effect a loan I brought in 20 francs lent me by a fellow provincial in that evil but happy day gambling was still tolerated. And in its loads, as hard as the rocky ore of Brazil. Young men, by risking a small sum, had a chance of winning a few gold pieces. My friend, too, had some Turkish tobacco brought home from Constantinople by a sailor, and he gave me quite as much as we had taken from Zéphirin Marcas. I conveyed the splendid cargo into port, and we went in triumph to repay our neighbor with a tawny wig of Turkish tobacco for his dark caporal. "You are determined not to be my debtors," said he. "You are giving me gold for copperu, our boys good boys." The sentences, spoken in varying tones, were variously emphasized. The words were nothing, but the expression that made us friends of 10 years standing at once. Marcas, on hearing us coming, had covered up his papers. We understood that it would be taking a liberty to allude to his means of subsistence, and felt ashamed of having watched him. His cupboard stood open in it. There were 2 shirts, a white necktie, and a razor. The razor made me shudder. A looking-glass, worth 5 francs perhaps, hung near the window. The man's few and simple movements had a sort of savage grandeur. The doctor and I looked at each other, wondering what we could say in reply. Just seeing that I was speechless, asked Marcas jestingly, "You cultivate literature, monsieur?" "Far from it," replied Marcas. "I should not be so wealthy." "I fancied," said I, "that poetry alone in these days was amply sufficient to provide a man with lodgings as bad as ours." My remark made Marcus smile, and the smile gave a charm to his yellow face. "Ambition is not a less severe taskmaster to those who fail," said he. "You who are beginning life, walk in the beaten paths. Never dream of rising superior, you will be ruined. You advise us to stay just as we are," said the doctor, smiling. There is something so infectious and childlike in the pleasantries of youth that Marcus smiled again in reply. "What incidents can have given you this detestable philosophy?" asked Roman. I forgot once more that chance is the result of an immense equation of which we know not all the factors when we start from zero to work up to the unit. The chances are incalculable to ambitious men. Paris is an immense roulette table, and every young man fancies he can hit on a successful progression of numbers. He offered us the tobacco I had brought that we might smoke with him. The doctor went to fetch our pipes. Marcas filled his, and then he came to sit in our room, bringing the tobacco with him. Since there were but 2 chairs in his, just as brisk as a squirrel, ran out and returned with a boy, carrying 3 bottles of Bordeaux, some brie cheese, and a loaf. "Ha," said I to myself, 15 francs, and I was right to a sou. Just gravely laid 5 francs on the chimney shelf. There are immeasurable differences between the gregarious man and the man who lives closest to nature. Toussaint Louverture, after he was caught, died without speaking a word. Napoleon, transplanted to a rock, talked like a magpie, wanted to account for himself. Marcas erred. In the same way, but for our benefit only, silence in all its majesty is to be found only in the savage. There is never a criminal who, though he might let his secrets fall with his head into the basket of sawdust, does not feel the purely social impulse to tell them to somebody. Nay, I am wrong. We have seen one Iroquois of the Faubourg Saint Marceau, who raised the Parisian to the level of the natural savageria republican, a conspirator, a Frenchman, an old man, who outdid all we have heard of Negro determination, and all that Cooper tells us of the tenacity and coolness of the Redskins, under defeat. Maury, the Guatemazan of the mountain, preserved an attitude unparalleled in the annals of European justice. This is what Marcus told us during the small hours, sandwiching his discourse with slices of bread spread with cheese and washed down with wine. All the tobacco was burned out now, and then the hackney coaches clattering across the Place de l'Odéon, or the omnibuses toiling past, sent up their dull rumbling, as if to remind us that Paris was still close to us. His family lived at Vitter. His father and mother had 1,500 francs a year in the funds. He had received an education gratis in a seminary, but had refused to enter the priesthood. He felt in himself the fires of immense ambition, and had come to Paris on foot at the age of 20. The possessor of 200 francs, he had studied the law, working in an attorney's office where he had risen to be superior clerk. He had taken his doctor's degree in law, had mastered the old and modern codes, and could hold his own with the most famous pleaders. He had studied the law of nations, and was familiar with European treaties and international practice. He had studied men and things in 5 capitals: London, Berlin, Vienna, Petersburg, and Constantinople. No man was better informed than he as to the rules of the chamber. For 5 years, he had been reporter of the debates for a daily paper. He spoke extempore and admirably, and could go on for a long time in that deep, appealing voice which had struck us to the soul indeed. He proved by the narrative of his life that he was a great orator, a concise orator, serious, and yet full of piercing eloquence. He resembled Barrier in his fervor, and in the impetus which commands the sympathy of the masses, and was like Thiers in refinement and skill. But he would have been less diffuse, less in difficulties. For a conclusion, he had intended to rise rapidly to power, without burdening himself first with the doctrines necessary to begin with for a man in opposition, but an incubus later to the statesman. Marcas had learned everything that a real statesman should know. Indeed, his amazement was considerable when he had occasion to discern the utter ignorance of men who have risen to the administration of public affairs in France, though in him it was vocation that had led to study nature, had been generous and bestowed all that cannot be acquired: keen perceptions, self-command, a nimble wit, rapid judgment, decisiveness. And what is the genius of these men? Fertility in resource. By the time when Marcus thought himself duly equipped, France was torn by intestine divisions arising from the triumph of the House of Orleans over the elder branch of the Bourbons. The field of political warfare is evidently changed. Civil war henceforth cannot last for long, and will not be fought out in the provinces in France. Such struggles will be of brief duration, and at the seat of government, and the battle will be the close of the moral contest which will have been brought to an issue by superior minds. This state of things will continue so long as France has her present singular form of government, which has no analogy with that of any other country, for there is no more resemblance between the English and the French constitutions than between the two lands. Thus Marcas' place was in the political press. Being poor and unable to secure his election, he hoped to make a sudden appearance. He resolved on making the greatest possible sacrifice, for a man of superior intellect, to work as a subordinate to some rich and ambitious deputy like a second Bonaparte. He sought his Barras, the new Colbert hoped to find a Mazarin. He did immense services, and he did them then, and there he assumed no importance, he made no boast, he did not complain of ingratitude. He did them in the hope that his patron would put him in a position to be elected. Deputy Marcas wished for nothing but a loan that might enable him to purchase a house in Paris. The qualification required by law. Richard Roman III asked for nothing but his horse. In 3 years, Marcas had made his Manon of the 50 supposed great statesmen, who are the battledores with which two cunning players toss the ministerial portfolios, exactly as the man behind the puppet show hits punch against the constable in his street theater, and counts on always getting paid. This man existed only by Marcas, but he had just brains enough to appreciate the value of his ghost, and to know that Marcas, if he ever came to the front, would remain there, would be indispensable, while he himself would be translated to the polar zone of Luxembourg. So he determined to put insurmountable obstacles in the way of his mentor's advancement, and hid his purpose under the semblance of the utmost sincerity. Like all mean men, he could dissimulate to perfection. And he soon made progress in the ways of ingratitude, for he felt that he must kill Marcas not to be killed by him. These two men, apparently so united, hated each other as soon as one had deceived the other. The politician was made one of a ministry. Marcas remained in the opposition to hinder his man from being attacked, nay, by skillful tactics. He won him the applause of the opposition to excuse himself for not rewarding his subaltern. The chief pointed out the impossibility of finding a place suddenly for a man on the other side, without a great deal of maneuvering. Marcas had hoped confidently for a place to enable him to marry, and thus acquire the qualification he so ardently desired. He was 32, and the chamber ere long must be dissolved. Having detected his man in this flagrant act of bad faith, he overthrew him, or at any rate contributed largely to his overthrow, and covered him with mud. A fallen minister, if he is to rise again to power, must show that he is to be feared. This man, intoxicated by royal glibness, had fancied that his position would be permanent. He acknowledged his delinquencies. Besides confessing them, he did Marcas a small money service, for Marcas had got into debt. He subsidized the newspaper on which Marcas worked, and made him the manager of it. Though he despised the man Marcas, who practically was being subsidized, too consented to take the part of the fallen minister, without unmasking at once all the batteries of his superior intellect. Marcas came a little further than before. He showed half his shrewdness. The ministry lasted only 180 days. It was swallowed up. Marcas had put himself into communication with certain deputies, had molded them like dough, leaving each impressed with a high opinion of his talent. His puppet again became a member of the ministry. And then the paper was ministerial. The ministry united the paper with another solely to squeeze out Marcas, who in this fusion had to make way for a rich and insolent rival whose name was well known, and who already had his foot in the stirrup. Marcas relapsed into utter destitution. His haughty patron well knew the depths into which he had cast him. Where was he to go? The ministerial papers, privily warned, would have nothing to say to him. The opposition papers did not care to admit him to their offices. Marcas could side neither with the Republicans nor with the Legitimists, two parties whose triumph would mean the overthrow of everything that now is. Ambitious men like a fast hold on things, said he with a smile. He lived by writing a few articles on commercial affairs, and contributed to one of those encyclopedias brought out by speculation, and not by learning. Finally, a paper was founded which was destined to live but 2 years, but which secured his services from that moment. He renewed his connection with the minister's enemies. He joined the party who were working for the fall of the government, and as soon as his pickaxe had free play, it fell. This paper had now for 6 months ceased to exist. He had failed to find employment of any kind. He was spoken of as a dangerous man. Calumny attacked him. He had unmasked a huge financial and mercantile job by a few articles, and a pamphlet. He was known to be a mouthpiece of a banker who was said to have paid him largely, and from whom he was supposed to expect some patronage in return for his championship. Marcas, disgusted by men and things, worn out by 5 years of fighting, regarded as a free lance rather than as a great leader, crushed by the necessity of earning his daily bread, which hindered him from gaining ground in despair at the influence exerted by money over mind, and given over to dire poverty, buried himself in a garret to make 30 sous a day, the sum strictly answering to his needs. Meditation had leveled a desert all round him. He read the papers to be informed of what was going on. Pozzo di Borgo had once lived like this for some time. Marcas, no doubt, was planning a serious attack, accustoming himself to dissimulation, and punishing himself for his blunders by Pythagorean muteness, but he did not tell us the reasons for his conduct. It is impossible to give you an idea of the scenes of the highest comedy that lay behind this algebraic statement of his career, his useless patience dogging the footsteps of fortune, which presently took wings, his long tramps over the thorny brakes of Paris, his breathless chases, as a petitioner his attempts to win over fools, the schemes laid only to fail through the influence of some frivolous woman, the meetings with men of business, who expected their capital to bring them places, and a peerage as well as large interest. Then the hopes rising in a towering wave, only to break in foam on the shoal, the wonders wrought in reconciling adverse interests which after working together for a week fell asunder, the annoyance, 1,000 times, repeated, of seeing a dunce decorated with the Legion of Honor, and preferred though as ignorant as a shopboy to a man of talent. Then what Marcas called the stratagems of stupidity. You strike a man, and he seems convinced, he nods his head, everything is settled. Next day this india-rubber ball, flattened for a moment, has recovered itself. In the course of the night, it is as full of wind as ever. You must begin all over again. And you go on till you understand that you are not dealing with a man, but with a lump of gum that loses shape in the sunshine. These thousand annoyances, this vast waste of human energy, on barren spots, the difficulty of achieving any good, the incredible facility of doing mischief, 2 strong games played out, twice won, and then twice lost, the hatred of a statesman, a blockhead, with a painted face and a wig, but in whom the world believed all these things great and small had not crushed, but for the moment had dashed Marcas. In the days when money had come into his hands, his fingers had not clutched it. He had allowed himself the exquisite pleasure of sending it all to his familito, his sisters, his brothers, his old father. Like Napoleon in his fall, he asked for no more than 30 sous a day, and any man of energy can earn 30 sous for a day's work in Paris. When Marcas had finished the story of his life, intermingled with reflections, maxims, and observations revealing him as a great politician, a few questions and answers on both sides, as to the progress of affairs in France and in Europe, were enough to prove to us that he was a real statesman. For a man may be quickly and easily judged when he can be brought on to the ground of immediate difficulties. There is a certain shibboleth for men of superior talents, and we were of the tribe of modern Levites, without belonging as yet to the temple. As I have said, our frivolity covered certain purposes, which just has carried out, and which I am about to execute. When we had done talking, we all 3 went out cold, as it was to walk in the Luxembourg Gardens, till the dinner hour. In the course of that walk, our conversation, grave throughout, turned on the painful aspects of the political situation. Each of us contributed his remarks, his comment, or his jest, a pleasantry, or a proverb. This was no longer exclusively a discussion of life on the colossal scale just described by Marcas, the soldier of political warfare, Nor was it the distressful monologue of the wrecked navigator, stranded in a garret in the Hotel Cornet. It was a dialogue in which two well-informed young men, having gauged the times they lived in, were endeavoring, under the guidance of a man of talent, to gain some light on their own future prospects. Why asked just did you not wait patiently for an opportunity, and imitate the only man who has been able to keep the lead since the Revolution of July by holding his head above water? Have I not said that we never know where the roots of chance lie? Carroll was in identically the same position as the orator you speak of. That gloomy young man of a bitter spirit had a whole government in his head. The man of whom you speak had no idea beyond mounting on the crupper of every event of the two. Carroll was the better man. Well, one becomes a minister. Carroll remained a journalist. The incomplete but craftier man is living. Carroll is dead. I may point out that your man has for 15 years been making his way, and is but making it still. He may yet be caught and crushed between two cars full of intrigues on the highroad to power. He has no house, he has not the favor of the palace like Metternich, nor like Villèle, the protection of a compact majority. I do not believe that the present state of things will last 10 years longer. Hence, supposing I should have such poor good luck, I am already too late to avoid being swept away by the commotion I foresee. I should need to be established in a superior position. What commotion? Asked just. August 1830, said Marcas in solemn tones, holding out his hand towards Paris. August, the offspring of youth, which bound the sheaves, and of intellect, which had ripened the harvest, forgot to provide for youth and intellect. Youth will explode like the boiler of a steam engine. Youth has no outlet in France. It is gathering an avalanche of underrated capabilities, of legitimate and restless ambitions. Young men are not marrying now. Families cannot tell what to do with their children. What will the thunderclap be that will shake down these masses? I know not, but they will crash down into the midst of things and overthrow everything. These are laws of hydrostatics, which act on the human race. The Roman Empire had failed to understand them, and the barbaric hordes came down. The barbaric hordes now are the intelligent class. The laws of overpressure are at this moment acting slowly and silently in our midst. The government is the great criminal. It does not appreciate the two powers to which it owes everything. It has allowed its hands to be tied by the absurdities of the contract. It is bound ready to be the victim. Louis, Roman 14, Napoleon, England, all were or are eager for intelligent youth. In France, the young are condemned by the new legislation, by the blundering principles of elective rights, by the unsoundness of the ministerial constitution. Look at the elective chamber. You will find no deputies of 30. The youth of Richelieu, and of Mazarin of Turenne, and of Colbert of Pitt, and of Saint Just of Napoleon, and of Prince Metternich, would find no admission there. Burke, Sheridan, or Fox could not win seats even if political majority had been fixed at 1 in 20 and eligibility had been relieved of every disabling qualification. The departments would have returned the very same members, men, devoid of political talent, unable to speak without murdering French grammar, and among whom in 10 years scarcely one statesman has been found. The causes of an impending event may be seen, but the event itself cannot be foretold at this moment. The youth of France is being driven into republicanism, because it believes that the republic would bring it emancipation. It will always remember the young representatives of the people, and the young army leaders. The imprudence of the government is only comparable to its avarice. That day left its echoes in our lives. Marcas confirmed us in our resolution to leave France, where young men of talent and energy are crushed under the weight of successful commonplace, envious, and insatiable middle age. We dined together in the Rue de la Harpe. We thenceforth felt for Marcas the most respectful affection. He gave us the most practical aid in the sphere of the mind. That man knew everything, he had studied everything for us. He cast his eye over the whole civilized world, seeking the country where openings would be at once the most abundant and the most favorable to the success of our plans. He indicated what should be the goal of our studies. He bid us make haste, explaining to us that time was precious, that emigration would presently begin, and that its effect would be to deprive France of the cream of its powers, and of its youthful talent. That their intelligence, necessarily sharpened, would select the best places, and that the great thing was to be first in the field. Thenceforward we often sat late at work under the lamp. Our generous instructor wrote some notes for our guidance at pages for just and 3, from full of invaluable advice, sort of information, which experience alone can supply such landmarks as only genius can place in those papers. Smelling of tobacco and covered with writing so vile as to be almost hieroglyphic, there are suggestions for a fortune, and forecasts of unerring acumen. There are hints as to certain parts of America and Asia, which have been fully justified both before and since, just and I could set out. Marcus, like us, was in the most abject poverty. He earned, indeed, his daily bread. But he had neither linen clothes nor shoes. He did not make himself out any better than he was. His dreams had been of luxury as well as of power. He did not admit that this was the real Marcus. He abandoned this person, indeed, to the caprices of life. What he lived by was the breath of ambition. He dreamed of revenge, while blaming himself for yielding to so shallow a feeling. The true statesman ought above all things to be superior to vulgar passions. Like the man of science, it was in these days of dire necessity that Marcus seemed to us so great, nay, so terrible. There was something awful in the gaze, which saw another world than that which strikes the eye of ordinary men to us. He was a subject of contemplation and astonishment, for the young, which of us has not known it? Young have a keen craving to admire, they love to attach themselves, and are naturally inclined to submit to the men they feel to be superior, as they are to devote themselves to a great cause. Our surprise was chiefly roused by his indifference. In matters of sentiment, women had no place in his life. When we spoke of this matter, a perennial theme of conversation among Frenchmen, he simply remarked, "Gowns cost too much." He saw the look that passed between Just and me and went on, "Yes, far too much. The woman you buy, and she is the least expensive, it takes a great deal of money. The woman who gives herself takes all your time. Woman extinguishes every energy, every ambition." Napoleon reduced her to what she should be from that point of view. He really was great. He did not indulge such ruinous fancies of Louis Roman XIV and Louis Roman XV. At the same time, he could love in secret. We discovered that, like Pitt, who made England his wife, Marcas bore France in his heart. He idolized his country. He had not a thought that was not for his native land. His fury at feeling that he had in his hands the remedy for the evils which so deeply saddened him, and could not apply it, ate into his soul. And this rage was increased by the inferiority of France at that time. As compared with Russia and England, France, a third-rate power, this cry came up again and again in his conversation. The intestinal disorders of his country had entered into his soul, all the contests between the court and the chamber showing, as they did, incessant change and constant vacillation, which must injure the prosperity of the country. He scoffed at as backstairs squabbles. "This is peace at the cost of the future," said he. One evening, Just and I were at work, sitting in perfect silence. Marcas had just risen to toil at his copying, for he had refused our assistance. In spite of our most earnest entreaties, we had offered to take it in turns to copy a batch of manuscript, so that he should do but a third of his distasteful task. He had been quite angry, and we had ceased to insist. We heard the sound of gentlemanly boots in the passage, and raised our heads, looking at each other. There was a tap at Marca's door. Never took the key out of the lock end. We heard the hero answer, "Come in, then. What you hear, monsieur?" "I myself," replied the retired minister. It was the Diocletian of this unknown martyr. For some time, he and our neighbor conversed in an undertone. Suddenly Marcas, whose voice had been heard, but rarely, as is natural in a dialogue, in which the applicant begins by setting forth, the situation, broke out loudly in reply to some offer we had not overheard. "You would laugh at me for a fool," cried he, "if I took you at your word. Jesuits are a thing of the past, but Jesuitism is eternal. Your Machiavellism and your generosity are equally hollow and untrustworthy. You can make your own calculations, but who can calculate on you? Your court is made up of owls who fear the light, of old men who quake in the presence of the young, or who simply disregard them. The government is formed on the same pattern. As the court, you have hunted up the remains of the empire. As the Restoration enlisted the voltigeurs of Louis Roman XIV, hitherto, the evasions of cowardice have been taken for the maneuvering of ability, but dangers will come, and the younger generation will rise as they did in 1790. They did grand things. Then just now you change ministries, as a sick man turns in his bed. These oscillations betray the weakness of the government. You work on an underhand system of policy, which will be turned against you, for France will be tired of your shuffling. France will not tell you that she is tired of you. A man never knows whence his ruin comes. It is the historian's task to find out. But you will undoubtedly perish as the reward of not having the youth of France to lend you its strength and energy, for having hated really capable men, for not having lovingly chosen them from this noble generation, for having in all cases preferred mediocrity. You have come to ask my support, but you are an atom in that decrepit heap, which is made hideous by self-interest which trembles and squirms. And because it is so mean tries to make France mean too, my strong nature my ideas would work like poison in you twice. You have tricked me twice, have I overthrown you? If we unite a third time, it must be a very serious matter, I should kill myself, if I allowed myself to be duped, for I should be to blame, not you. Then we heard the humblest entreaties, the most fervent adjuration, not to deprive the country of such superior talents. The man spoke of patriotism, and Marcas uttered a significant ow ow, he laughed at his wood patron. Then the statesman was more explicit, he bowed to the superiority of his erewhile counselor. He pledged himself to enable Marcas to remain in office to be elected deputy, then he offered him a high appointment, promising him that he the speaker would thenceforth be the subordinate of a man whose subaltern he was only worthy to be. He was in the newly formed ministry, and he would not return to power unless Marcas had a post in proportion to his merit. He had already made it a condition. Marcas had been regarded as indispensable. Marcas refused. I have never before been in a position to keep my promises. Here is an opportunity of proving myself faithful to my word, and you fail me. To this Marcas made no reply. The boots were again audible in the passage on the way to the stairs. Marcas, Marcas, we both cried, rushing into his room. Why refuse? He really meant it. His offers are very handsome. At any rate, go to see the ministers. In a twinkling, we had given Marcas 100 reasons. The minister's voice was sincere. Without seeing him, we had felt sure that he was honest. I have no clothes, replied Marcas. Rely on us, said Just with a glance at me. Marcas had the courage to trust us. A light flashed in his eye. He pushed his fingers through his hair, lifting it from his forehead with a gesture that showed some confidence in his luck. And when he had thus unveiled his face, so to speak, we saw in him a man absolutely unknown to us. Marcas sublime, Marcas in his power, his mind was in its element, the bird, restored to the free air, the fish to the water, the horse galloping across the plain. It was transient, his brow clouded again. He had, it would seem, a vision of his fate. Halting doubt had followed close on the heels of wide-winged hope. We left him to himself. Now then, said I to the doctor, we have given our word, how are we to keep it? We will sleep upon it, said Just, and tomorrow morning we will talk it over. Next morning, we went for a walk in the Luxembourg. We had had time to think over the incident of the past night, and were both equally surprised at the lack of address shown by Marcas in the minor difficulties of life. A man who never saw any difficulties in the solution of the hardest problems of abstract or practical politics, but these elevated characters can all be tripped up on a grain of sand, and will like the grandest enterprise misfire for want of 1,000 francs. It is the old story of Napoleon, who for lack of a pair of boots did not set out for India. Well, what have you hit upon? Asked Just. I have thought of a way to get him a complete outfit. Where? From Human. That's out? Human, my boy, never goes to his customer. She's customers go to him, so that he does not know whether I am rich or poor. He only knows that I dress well and look decent in the clothes he makes for me. I shall tell him that an uncle of mine has dropped in from the country, and that his indifference in matters of dress is quite a discredit to me in the upper circles, where I am trying to find a wife. It will not be human if he sends in his bill before 3 months. The doctor thought this a capital idea for a vaudeville, but poor enough in real life, and doubted my success. But I give you my word of honor, Human dressed Marcas, and being an artist turned him out as a political personage ought to be dressed. Just lent Marcas 200 francs in gold, the product of 2 watches bought on credit, and pawned at the Mont Piet. For my part, I had said nothing of the 6 shirts and all necessary linen, which cost me no more than the pleasure of asking for them from a forewoman in a shop whom I had treated to musards during the carnival. Marcas accepted everything, thanking us no more than he ought. He only inquired as to the means by which we had got possession of such riches, and we made him laugh for the last time. We looked on our Marcas as shipowners when they have exhausted their credit, and every resource at their command. It fit out a vessel must look on it as it puts out to sea. Here Charles was silent. He seemed crushed by his memories. Well, cried the audience, and what happened? I will tell you in a few words, for this is not Romancy, is history. We saw no more of Marcas. The administration lasted for 3 months. It fell at the end of the session. Then Marcas came back to us, worked to death. He had sounded the crater of power. He came away from it with the beginnings of brain fever. The disease made rapid progress. We nursed him just. At once called in the chief physician of the hospital, where he was working as house surgeon. I was then living alone in our room, and I was the most attentive attendant, but care and science alike were in vain. By the month of January 1838, Marcas himself felt that he had but a few days to live. The man whose soul and brain he had been for 6 months never even sent to inquire after him. Marcas expressed the greatest contempt for the government. He seemed to doubt what the fate of France might be, and it was this doubt that had made him Roman 99. He thought detected treason in the heart of power, not tangible, seizable treason, the result of facts, but the treason of a system, the subordination of national interests to selfish ends. His belief in the degradation of the country was enough to aggravate his complaint. I myself was witness to the proposals made to him by one of the leaders of the antagonistic party, which he had fought against. His hatred of the men he had tried to serve was so virulent that he would gladly have joined the coalition that was about to be formed among certain ambitious spirits who at least had one idea in common, that of shaking off the yoke of the court. But Marcas could only reply to the envoy in the words of the Hotel de Ville. "It is too late." Marcas did not leave money enough to pay for his funeral just, and I had great difficulty in saving him from the ignominy of a pauper's bier. And we alone followed the coffin of Z. Marcas, which was dropped into the common grave of the cemetery of Montparnasse. We looked sadly at each other as we listened to this tale, the last we heard from the lips of Charles Raberdin the day before he embarked at Le Havre on a brig that was to convey him to the islands of Malay. We all knew more than one Marcas, more than one victim of his devotion to a party, repaid by betrayal or neglect. Les Jardins, May 1840.